What additional responsibilities come with your own RIA? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 123. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you start by heading on over to transitiontoria.com, you'll find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, transitiontoria.com. Okay, on this episode, we're going to be talking about if you were to start your own RIA, what additional responsibilities come with that. Now, I'll give you a couple motivations for why I want to make this episode, but one of the lead-in ones is there's a lot of people out there trying to scare advisors into not even considering an RIA path because of these horrendous responsibilities you will have that they tell you that you will not want to have to deal with, and they'll tell you the SEC is just going to destroy you, or you're not big enough to go into that RIA model. And the thing is, I hear from conversations with advisors and teams that are reaching out to me, they'll often say, oh, so-and-so has said this, is that accurate? And you always have to be careful who you're getting that information from. So an all too often scenario where that information is coming from is the current firm that advisor team is at now. So perhaps they're at like a wirehouse firm and they're talking to a colleague, or probably not talking to the branch manager, but somehow if it were to come up, and particularly a branch manager has a incentive to keep you as the advisor from considering other paths that might take you away from their branch that they're responsible for. So of course they're going to make it sound like, oh, this is going to be this horrible thing. You're going to spend all your time on compliance and on and on. And there's facts that are there and that we're going to discuss, that there are additional responsibilities, but oftentimes, again, it depends on the source. These things can be blown, way out of proportion. Now, that said, I am a big believer, if you followed along my episodes, of always discussing both sides of the coin. So I talk a lot about the additional flexibility you do achieve from having your own RIA, all kinds of ways that's accomplished, and typically the better economics in multiple fronts that comes along with it as well. One of those even being the proverbial, if you have your own RIA, 100% payout. I just did an episode on, do RIAs really get 100% payout? And sometimes you hear that being talked about from the pro RIA crowd. And that's all true. And again, you can check out that separate episode. But I am a believer in saying, okay, yeah, let's understand what those advantages are. And there are advantages, but what additional responsibilities come with obtaining those advantages? So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. I'm going to give you a couple examples of some of the main additional responsibilities you will potentially have to take on that you potentially don't have now. Depends on whatever your current affiliation circumstances are. And I'll lead into it by saying, for some of you, you've already taken on some of these responsibilities. Perhaps you're already with an independent broker-dealer type model, and so you've already taken on some of these responsibilities. You just haven't taken on maybe all of the responsibilities that come with the RIA model. For others of you that are maybe in that W-2 wirehouse regional broker-dealer type model now, there will be several different new responsibilities that will come with it. And again, I'm going to chat about some of those here. So the biggest one that typically comes up, and it's absolutely accurate, is from a responsibility standpoint, and it's worded in different ways, but essentially having to do your own compliance. So again, we're talking about if you start your own RIA, you will have responsibility for the RIA and all the regulations that you have to follow. And for those of you that are at perhaps an independent broker-dealer now, this is the biggest additional step you have not yet taken so far on your independent journey that you would be taking with your own RIA. So kind of, well, what does that mean? What is that additional responsibility? So that's just on the front end. That's literally getting the RIA registered, creating this entity. Because again, remember, The RIA, the Registered Investment Advisor, is an entity, not a person. You might own the RIA, you might be a financial advisor underneath the RIA, but the RIA is a legal entity that has to be created. There's a process for how to do that. Thousands of advisors have come before you. You just have to understand what that process is, who you lean on to help you with that. But standing up the RIA is a new responsibility. If you've never had an RIA, that you will have to cross that bridge. Now, related to that, once you get this new RIA legally registered, well, part of the responsibility of any RIA is there has to be a designated Chief Compliance Officer, CCO. Now, if you were a very, very, very large RIA, you potentially have scaled to the point where you are going out and hiring a standalone person that is the sole thing that person does. And at a certain size, that does start to occur, and then they might even have team members. But your more typical RIA, measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, as an example, typically it's someone on the team that gets to wear another hat as that CCO. So it could be the main principal of the firm or one of the principals. It could be maybe your lead ops person that's now going to wear that crown as well. But that is a responsibility that someone now has to have. And I'm going to talk about there is now responsibility because it's that CCO's job to make sure that the RIA, is following all the regulations that are required of any RIA. So that is a new responsibility. Who's going to be the CCO? How is that person going to fulfill their responsibilities? Excuse me. Okay, related, as the RIA kind of continues on its now live path, an additional responsibility, that RIA will be examined by the regulators. Now, if there's a couple of variables that could impact this, but it's generally, if you have less than 100 million in assets under management, you're likely to be registered or regulated by your state. Above that, you're going to be SEC registered and regulated by them. And they will, whether it's state or SEC, they will come in on occasion. It's not generally not some surprise thing. I did an episode on what you can expect during a regulatory exam, but it is a process, and they will come, and it's usually lasts over months because there's a data gathering process. There might be on-site, there might be follow-up, and examine your RA to make sure you're following all the rules and regulations. That process will occur. Now, typically, that's not an annual type exercise. Typically, a new RIA, generally in the States, can be all over the place, but particularly with the SEC, generally can expect that first exam in the first year or two. And then after that, it could be based on the averages occurring right now. It could potentially be 5, 6. I've even heard some people throw out the 7-year range of how frequently your RA might be examined. Obviously, if your RA is more complicated or somehow deemed to be higher risk, you might be on the lower end of that or even less, or you might be right in the mix of that. But that just gives you an idea that, okay, you will be examined. There is a process for how to get through that exam. It won't be generally every year by any stretch of the imagination, but that is, again, a responsibility that if you're currently at a broker-dealer and some other firm, they're doing that, this would be a new responsibility that you have to handle as well. So when I talk about this, okay, well, how do you get the thing registered? How is that CCO supposed to manage this new responsibilities that they don't necessarily even know what that means? Like, okay, what do I have to do on an annual basis or a quarterly basis? Whatever the case is, let alone how am I going to get through an exam? And so as I've talked about on several episodes, the way you manage that responsibility is to rely on, often referred to as a compliance consultant firm. So there are some wonderful solutions out there that you hire to help you with everything from the registration on the front end to make sure you are managing your compliance on an ongoing basis, and on that occasional exam when that happens to help you get through that process. That is how it's done. You do not want to attempt to do this entirely on your own, but you do have to wear that CCO hat, unless you even, not to go off on a tangent, there's even ways to essentially have an outsourced CCO. I did an episode on that as well if you want to check that out. But there generally is that responsibility, but you're relying on these compliance professionals to help you manage all of that responsibility. And keep in mind, there are over 30,000 RIAs, not 30,000 advisors, 30,000 RIAs. There are hundreds of thousands of advisors within those RIAs. So this is entirely doable, provided you use the right resources, provided you understand what that responsibility is. But it will be something most of you are not doing now, again, unless you have your own RIA. And then the last thing on compliance, and I'm just focusing most on this one because it's the biggest piece. Some people say, hey, I don't want to pay for compliance. Now I got to pay a compliance consultant firm to help me with all this. So now I got to pay for compliance. I don't care where you are now, what kind of firm you're at, what kind of affiliation model. You are already paying for compliance now. Now maybe you don't have to be the CCO and someone else is going through the monthly and quarterly tasks that have to be done. But guess what? They're not doing that for free. You are paying for that typically in the inverse of your payout. So if you're a traditional broker dealer, you get a payout. You don't get an itemized bill for what the inverse of that payout is for what they retain. But that's for everything they're providing for you. For some of you, that might be an office, that might be technology. In compliance is one of those things. So you are already paying for compliance. You just don't get a bill for it. You have no control over it. You have no control if they're providing you good value with how they're helping you try to stay compliant as a financial advisor. Entirely different in the RA space. But don't conclude that, oh, I don't want to pay for compliance. You already are now. So that's the big one. That doesn't cover everything to do with how to manage compliance as an RA, but I did want to put that one out as typically the biggest new responsibility advisors and teams have when they start their own RA. Excuse me. But a couple other little items that could be new responsibilities for you. Now, if you're already independent broker dealer or some sort of independent affiliation model now, you've maybe already done these things, so it's going to be moot. But if you're in that W-2 world, some of these will be new to you. So a big part of that is the additional responsibilities coming with managing your so-called local expenses. So this is running your local P&L. Now, there's a lot of reasons that is to your benefit to manage your own local P&L, and it goes beyond this episode of diving into why that's so advantageous. But there are a lot of advantages with that. However, that comes with additional responsibilities. So for example, if you are at a W-2 wirehouse firm now, for better or worse, they are providing you an office. Now, you don't have any say necessarily where that office is located. You might not necessarily even have any say of which physical office space within that office complex you get. But at the same time, out of fairness, you don't have to figure out the lease or pay the lease or figure out the utilities or anything like that. As an independent RIA or any independent model for that matter, you will now be responsible for your local office. Now, there's a lot of reasons that's to your benefit. I've done a whole episode on how you can use the real estate to your advantage in the RIA space, so check that out. But that can and generally is much more advantageous for you to control. However, that does come with more responsibility. You're the one that now has to go out there and procure office space. You're the one that maybe has to sign a lease or buy a building if that's what you're doing. So to be fair, there is more responsibility that, but a lot of benefits that come with that as well. Another example of additional responsibility is building a tech stack. I've done an episode on what is a tech stack. For better or worse, if you're at a firm now, that's kind of a plug and play option. Again, that we keep picking on the wirehouse model. For better or worse, they provide technology for you, and that is generally, plug and play. There it is. Now, there's a lot of disadvantages to that. It's take it or leave it. Here's what we have for you. There's no, hey, let me go out into the marketplace and take the best of this solution, the best of this solution, and on and on. And by the way, let me only pay for what I'm actually going to use. Whereas at the wirehouse, again, you're paying for it. That's in the inverse of your payout. You get all this technology, and if you're only using 40% of it, guess what? You're still paying for all of it. So all kinds of additional advantages to manage the technology yourself. But that is, again, as the theme of this episode, an additional responsibility you have to undertake to put all that in place. There's a whole process for figuring that out. That's a typical thing I help advisors and teams with, again, is identifying all of these pieces, all of these variables that you have to solve for, and then how to solve for each one of them individually. And then the final example, this is not by any means an exhaustive list of those kind of local expenses, but I think it's indicative of why you should not be fearful of having additional responsibilities. And that is also managing your local team, right? So you have to hire and fire and all the benefits and responsibilities that come with that. But one of those pieces is making sure your folks are paid. So you have to establish payroll. Now, if you've never owned a business or had to manage a business, you've never had to figure out how to do payroll. Like, how do I actually pay these people on payday twice a month or whatever the cadence is? How do I pay the payroll taxes that have to come out? How do I debit from their pay, perhaps the 401k contributions we're going to set up? And that's a perfect example where that's an additional responsibility of having an independent firm that can seem daunting if you've never done it. But again, provided you take the time to learn how to do it, rely on the right kind of vendors to help you with it. And yes, there's a learning curve with that, but once you do it, once you establish it, once it's in place, trust me, you'll quickly move on, and payroll will not be something you have any anxiety about, or, oh gosh, how am I supposed to figure that out? Yes, there was a learning curve. Yes, you had to get over the hump, but now it's in place and off you go. Same kind of thing back with compliance. Compliance can seem daunting. There's a lot to learn. I've got to put a lot in place. How is this all going to work? But once you kind of get that process going, once you have procedures, once you have your team members trained as need be, it's just part of running the business at that point. So yes, payroll is an additional responsibility. Yes, compliance is. You just have to put them in place, get that all figured out. Yes, that will take work, but once you're on the other side, you're generally in good shape and you kind of go forward from there. Now, the final thing I will leave you with on this front is, and again, this was not an exhaustive list of all of the additional responsibilities, but I did want to, again, just acknowledge there are additional responsibilities. I say that in a lot of episodes, and give you an idea of what some of those main responsibilities are. Again, in this case, compliance is typically the biggest one, but for some of you also, the different pieces of managing your local P&L as well will be a big one also. But what I did want to leave you with, while it doesn't necessarily solve for all of these things I mentioned, to the degree you say, hey, I do want, Brad, a lot of the economics, the better economics you mentioned in those episodes, I do want the better flexibility and freedom of the RIA model, blah, blah, blah. I could go on and on about all those advantages. But no matter how there's a way to solve for all these things, if you're an advisor, you might say, I just as well still not do some of that myself, even if there's a lot of advantages to doing it. And that's where it comes back to, I also talk about in a lot of episodes how you might consider joining an RIA. Now, there are all kinds of flavors of RIAs out there. You got to be careful with which ones you choose, and some will not be appealing at all to wherever your particular path is in your career at the moment. But there are some wonderful solutions out there, and among others that say, hey, you retain 100% ownership of your practice. You get to use your own brand. You will be 1099 and control your local expenses and all the advantages that come with that. But hey, we will do some of those behind the scene things that perhaps you would just rather not do yourself. We will manage that compliance. We will manage the tech stack pieces. We will do your fee bill in for you every quarter or whatever the sequence is. And so they'll take a lot of that off your plate, kind of as your infrastructure partner, for lack of a better term, but still allow you to have a lot of the advantages of the model in general. So just something to think about if you're listening to this and you say, wow, okay, there's all kinds of new responsibilities. I'm still, whether intimidated by it or still just, hey, some of that just still doesn't at all sound appealing to me. Is there almost kind of a go-between where I can still have a lot of those advantages, but still rely on someone else to do a lot of these things? And the answer is yes. Again, some wonderful solutions out there, but there's so many different flavors. You really have to understand how they compare. That's a big part of what I do, is help advisors say, what's your practice look like now? What's this RIA model thing all about? Should you maybe start your own RIA? Should you maybe join an RIA? There's a flavor in the middle you should maybe be considering. Helping you understand how all of the pieces come together. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. First things first, though, as I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA. Head on over to transitiontoria.com, where you can find, again, all the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you understand the model. But at the top of every page is a contact link. If you click on that, you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me, whether you want to talk about today's topic about responsibilities or anything else RIA related. I'm happy to have that conversation with you. Again, transitiontoria.com. And with that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.